All right, welcome everybody. My name is Jen Rowe from the city of Boston. As chair of the MPO's TIP Process Engagement and Readiness Committee, I'm going to call this meeting to order and read some of our introductory notices and guidelines. All right, so you're invited to participate in our transportation planning process, regardless of your race, color, national origin, including limited English proficiency, religion, creed, gender, ancestry, ethnicity, disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, veteran status, or background. And then next slide, please. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with some exceptions with the following standards. Ooh, oh, we're moving forward quickly. um, One more forward. There we go. Okay. Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1, Level AA standards and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, or if you have any technical difficulties, please contact Ibu Qureshi, MPO staff, at iquraishi@ctps.org or 857-702-3695 or via the chat box in Zoom. Next, please. And then some meeting guidelines. All participants you should have joined the meeting with muted microphones. We do ask that you rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. You can do so with the three little dots in the top right of your little Zoom box. After the roll call, board members of the committee can mute and unmute themselves, but we do ask that you always remain muted unless you're actively speaking. To participate in the discussion, you can select the raise hand function, either by clicking on the participants button at the bottom of the screen. A window will pop up with the raised hand button at the bottom, or there's a reactions button in the toolbar as well. I will then call on participants to speak. If So at this point, I'm going to ask if you would like to use an AI note taker during this meeting, if you could raise your hand in Zoom so we can discuss that. All right, seeing none. If an AI note taker does join the meeting at a later point, we'll stop and discuss that. But for now, there are no AI note takers. And then the final note that if you are on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. All right. So for anyone who just joined, I'm Jen. I chair this committee. I represent Amber Wu for the city of Boston. I'll call roll now for the other members of the committee, beginning with MassDOT Seat 1.
Hi, Jen. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Chris Clem representing MassDOT Seat 1.
Great. Thanks, Chris. MassDOT Seat 2.
Good afternoon, John Bashad representing MassDOT Seat 2 today.
Good to see you, John. MAPC, we did get a note that Eric had a conflict today, but I just confirmed no one else from MAPC is here, right? Cool. Okay. The Community Advisory Council also is a member of this committee, but they just had elections, and so they don't have a member attending today, but they will beginning, I believe, at our next meeting. So I'll move now to the town of Brookline.
Good afternoon, Erin Chu, representing Select Board Chair Bernard Green for the town of Brookline.
Thanks, Erin. Town of Arlington.
Len Diggins, town of Arlington here.
To see you in your town of Arlington hat, Len.
Yes. So,
Inner Core Committee, City of Somerville.
Good afternoon, Brad Rawson here from the city of Somerville, representing the Inner Core.
Thanks, Brad. Metro West Regional Collaborative, City of Framingham.
Dennis Givetti representing Metro West and Mayor Charles Ziski of Framingham.
To see you, Dennis. Minuteman Advisory Group on Interlocal Coordination, Town of Acton. Is Nathaniel Ryan here? Okay, maybe not. We'll go to Metro West Regional Transit Authority.
Good afternoon. This is Tyler Tarasi representing Administrator Jim Nee for the Metro West Regional Transit Authority here.
Thanks, Tyler. All right, that's roll. So we'll now move to public comments. So there's an opportunity at the very onset of the meeting for public comment. So if anyone would like to do so, you may and you're not a member of the committee, please feel free to raise your hand to make a comment. We also do welcome comments during the meeting. You'll just probably wait until all the members have asked their questions. So you're welcome to wait to that point as well. Any member of the public like to comment at this time? Right. Waited 7 seconds. We'll move on then to the first action item, which is the approval of the July 24th meeting minutes. So I guess would anyone like to motion to approve the meeting minutes that were posted prior to this? Brad.
Move to approve.
All right. Is there a second for that?
I'll second.
Thanks, Aaron. All right. I'll call the roll. Mass.seat 1.
Mass.seat 1, yes.
Mass.seat 2.
Seat 2, John Bouchard, yes.
Town of Brookline.
Brookline, yes.
Great. Town of Arlington.
Arlington, yes.
Inner Core Committee, City of Somerville.
Somerville, yes.
Metro West Regional Collaborative, City of Framingham.
Framingham, yes.
Metro West Regional Transit Authority.
Tyler Terrasi, MWRTA, yes.
Great. And Jen Rowe, City of Boston, also yes. Great. I think that's our one action item. It's complete. So now we're going to shift into, I think, what will be the larger item on the agenda today, which is to continue a conversation we've been having on TIP readiness policy improvements. And for this, I'm going to turn it over to Adriana to get us kind of queued up.
Thank you very much. Hello, I'm Adriana Jacobson, and apologies, I'm multitasking today. I'm Zoom operating and presenting, so apologies if if there's any mishaps over there. But just to get started, so the purpose of today's presentation is to give an overview of the readiness guidelines, including why they're necessary, what the specifics of the policies are, and how these guidelines will be enforced. And we'll have a discussion about some of these next steps. So why is it essential that we develop and enforce these updated readiness guidelines? First, the TIP is the mechanism through which the MPO's visions and goals are delivered. If, for example, if a corridor is studied in the UPWP, the TIP is how those improvements are funded. When a major capital project is recommended in the LRTP, the TIP is how the project is built. And the TIP is also an essential mechanism for uplifting local municipal priorities to align with wider regional priorities. I almost said next slide, that's me. However, the only way that these projects can be delivered and the only way these visions and goals can be realized is if these projects are ready. When the TIP funds projects that aren't ready for their programming year, regardless of if they are new projects or if they're already on the TIP, this planning process and the relationship between the documents it cannot be realized. For example, LRT projects are not going to advance, UPWP studies are not acted upon, and local and regional priorities alike are not realized. As a reminder, the Boston Region MPO enacted the TIP project cost policies in 2021. This policy required more advanced design at the time of programming, specifically a 25% design. It also required additional communication between proponents and the board. And lastly, a project rescoring policy when cost increases exceeded a certain threshold. The first intervention required 25% design for new projects only. There were several projects currently programmed on the TIP that were not at 25% design in 2021, and some still are not. But in addition, the 25% design it can be a significant barrier, but it's not the only point of conflict. Delays also tend to happen at the 75 and 100% stages. So the 25% requirement, while while it can be a very important marker of readiness, definitely is not the only barrier that projects have to overcome. As we discussed during DIP development, the definition of 25% design varies. For example, it could mean 25% design submission, or it could mean 25% design approval. This was not specifically laid out in the original policy. In addition, some municipalities are able to more quickly advance to 25% design once they are already programmed on the tip, but they struggle to do so otherwise. In addition, the increasing requirements of the 25% design submission increase the cost of design services, which can be tricky especially for smaller municipalities if the construction funding is not guaranteed. To sum this up, this intervention created a higher barrier of entry, but failed to address the challenges facing the current program. Next, the second intervention it regarded the additional communication between project proponents, MassDOT staff, the MPO staff, and the MPO board. Overall, the implementation of this policy was successful. However, one of the flaws was that there was no enforcement mechanism for proponents that did not respond to requests for information and updates. This came up again in some of our conversations earlier this year, where some board members expressed frustration that they weren't hearing from projects that were experiencing issues. In addition, if the board did receive project updates that might impact project readiness, this created a difficult situation where the board felt like they had to single out a project. The potential political implications of singling out a project might not be worth the long-term health of the TIP program. And lastly, the third intervention regarding rescoring required board members to call out specific projects similar to intervention 2. In addition, this policy is a little bit more reactive than proactive, and that only projects that were already facing issues were rescored. It's also not very timely for our annual TIP development programming decisions. And in summary, these interventions were well crafted, but difficult to enforce. When designing a new policy, we have 3 major needs. First, for the design thresholds to be set for all 5 years, not just at the time of programming. Next, for the rescoring standard for all projects that had been on the TIP for 5+ years, no longer requiring board members to call out specific projects. And lastly, a fairly enforced policy that doesn't require singling out projects. Resolving these needs will lead to a more effective set of policies. I won't go over the specifics too much because we talked about this at the last TIPper meeting. But just a reminder that these guidelines are based on data from recently advertised projects that were not delayed and were advertised on time. So these are guidelines that recent and successful projects followed. And then last, we're going to go over what we call a readiness matrix that Ethan and I have created in order to visualize some of the potential actions for the board to take. So we're also going to just dig into how the riskiness of each issue can be evaluated, because not all readiness issues are created alike. For example, a very minor delay in the outer years, for example, a project being a couple months behind in 2020-30 is going to look very different than, for example, a project that's programmed in 2027 that hasn't had a 25% design approval. So we have to apply different actions to different readiness issues. This is a visualization of how this could look. So on the top, going across, we have the different actions that the board could take. And then on the side, we have the way that these actions would be enforced. So for example, looking at the delay column, the board could either recommend that a project is delayed, or the staff can recommend that a project is delayed. The board could vote to decide whether to delay a project, or the project could be automatically delayed without a vote. So this ranges from a little bit more relaxed and illustrative actions, such as communication and recommendations, to more automatic actions, such as removal. And as I said before, this different standards could apply to different readiness issues. And then we just wanted to mention that this column, the communication column, is already part of the 2021 project cost policy. Not that this isn't a very important portion as it is, but if we were to create a new policy that went beyond the 2021 cost project policies, it would have to do more than this current column, as it's something that we're already trying to do. And lastly, just some discussion questions for the group. We're hoping to have a policy by the end of the calendar year for the MPO board to vote on. And Ethan and I would definitely like to hear some of the next steps that the committee suggests. In addition, as we mentioned, we're trying to create a more standard policy instead of having projects enforced on a case-by-case basis because of this issue around singling out projects. But of course, we still want to make sure that there is room for exceptions in extreme cases, but want to find a balance between this like singling out issue and making sure that we're not just allowing regular non-enforcement. So how would we balance exceptions and a more uniform standard? And yeah, we can go on to discussion, but I'll go back to this slide so we can have the questions up on the board. But thank you.
Thank you, Adriana. I think I did a great job setting the table. Erin, I see you have a question.
Thank you, Adriana. So just a couple clarifying questions. So as we've been really talking about kind of the policy and when and how projects make it onto the tip, will this really be applied to, let's say, the handful of projects that have been, evaluated or evaluated based on sort of a previous scoring rubric, or not evaluated? Or do you think there will be future need for this kind of matrix and approach? Are we just trying to sort of right the ship right now, and then we're going to, kind of have a process where it's going to eliminate the need for this, or is there a scenario where we will often have projects that are not kind of scored, let's just say, equitably against other projects?
Yeah, so I think this is focusing a little bit less on the scoring, but I think going forward we want there to we want projects to need to be delayed like less often, but we also recognize that scopes change and issues come up, and that we're never going to eliminate delays and scope changes overall and cost increases and stuff like that. So it's I think we can try to right the ship as much as we can, but I don't think it's gonna solve all of our issues. Apologies if I didn't quite answer the question.
I'm conflating a couple policies here as well, and I think some things that we're talking about, and we were talking about at the MPO earlier, and kind of this readiness component. So no, that was helpful, Adriana. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
And before I move over to Brad, Ethan, did you want to have something you wanted to add there?
Yeah, thank you. To Erin's comment just now, I also wanted to clarify something. So these are all interrelated, and we actually have a section after this one we'll talk about the scoring as well and how things are going to continue moving forward. That matrix that we showed, part of the reason why it was blank is it's more there as a thought exercise, recognizing that these guidelines are still very much under debate. But now that we're starting to get into the development season for the 2027 to 31 tip, we would like members of this committee to start thinking about, okay, once we do figure out a set of guidelines, how will those guidelines then actually be acted upon come the spring? So there are the policies that are being voted upon, the scoring and the readiness. We just want to make sure that folks are aware that there are still a spectrum of decisions that could be made based on these policies in the future, not necessarily written out and covered by the policies. That's another longer term stage we'll be pursuing.
Thanks, Ethan. Yeah, and I think Maybe just one more thing to add to that is like in my mind, there may be some world in which we will feel actually more comfortable passing these readiness guidelines when also we understand what the actual like what the impact of them would be, and that's kind of that side of like, okay, what is the enforcement mechanism like, and what do we have, how much flexibility versus not flexibility, and that sort of thing, if that makes sense. Like, yeah, Ethan.
Yeah, I apologize, but I also couldn't help but add in just a witty point of the best way to get a problematic project off the tip is to advertise it, which means to make it successfully get delivered. So the primary objective to something that was also brought up during this morning's MPO meeting is, making sure that these guidelines help to move projects forward so they can get advertised.
Always a good option. Get your project advertised. Okay. Thank you for the reminder, Ethan. Brad.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Good discussion as always. So I think that we in Tipper and the MPO as a whole has spent a lot of time at least acknowledging a couple of the main project development mechanisms that add risk and create turbulence. Those are specifically utility conflict issues that often emerge late in a design or even in a construction process, and also right-of-way issues, which generally involve a heck of a lot of Mass DOT staff time that often is that is under less control of, say, a municipal proponent than other design elements. So I would love for us to be stress testing those two risk factors and use cases throughout this matrix style discussion. But there's a third one that Aaron and Adriana's last discussion reminded me of, and it came up also this morning. It's about scope. I'm not sure if the tipper or the MPO has struggled or named the issues of like scope changes and rescoping quite often enough or specifically enough. But when a project proponent, whether agency or municipality, decides to add scope or delete scope, then there's got to be a yellow alarm bell that starts to go off for us. And it's not to be framed as punitive and say we shouldn't be rescoping, right? We all want to respond to new information and to constituents and end users. However, any rescoping decision adds risk and adds potential time and potential cost. And so I do wonder if the MPO's readiness criteria could involve some way to automate and flag the likelihood that scope is changing. Let me use a Somerville project that Mass DOT is a proponent for as an example. With McGrath Boulevard, which is a large tip-funded project, we have consistently advocated for a transitway solution, like Columbus Ave, Boston style center running transit. Mass DOT is not currently advancing that right now, but if they were to, if MBTA and Mass DOT got excited about that, I believe that our tip readiness process should probably have like a way to flag that and be like, whoa, everybody, there's going to be redesign. There could be right-of-way implications. We might need to ratchet up the readiness risk factors here. And so there's just one example looking in the mirror. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you for raising that, Brad. Definitely agree. And yeah, I think one of the things that we saw the prior. Ooh, Dennis, I think you might have unmuted. Thank you. In the prior season, certainly like there were projects, including Boylston in Boston, where it looked like it had a 25%, but the scope had changed. So there, yeah, I think part of like an asterisk or some sort of recognition that that's something that does happen with projects, and we should probably account for it. I think Len is next, and then Dennis.
Thank you. Just so you know, I'm going to have to leave at 3:25 for an Arlington-related meeting. So I mean, look, the reason that we're doing this is not because we are control freaks and we want to show that the MPO is able to keep projects on schedule. It's that when things fall off schedule, it has implications on the following years. If we had a big buffer, and pushing projects back didn't affect projects in that year, then it'd be fine. We don't do that. I understand why we don't do that. We don't have a whole lot of money anyway, so that even if we did set aside some money, it probably wouldn't be enough for the kind of delays that we're seeing. And so as came out at this meeting, it's like part of the reason for rescoring, getting everything on the same scoring alignment is so that if we have to make decisions about who to push back, we can do that in a way that is more objective. But I'll posit this, that if a project is moving along on schedule, the proponent's doing everything right, and another project, for whatever reason, justifiable or not, has to be delayed, it shouldn't knock out the project that's been proceeding along, on time, and at cost. I think if we can agree to that, that would help us a whole lot. And so then what happens to that project that has to be delayed? Well, even if there are good reasons for delay, if there's not room for it because all the other projects in that year, in the fallback year, are performing on schedule, it just has to go back another year, because what rationale would we have for pushing back a project that's been on time and on time and on cost. So that's my feelings about it. But if people feel differently, I'm certainly looking forward to hearing objections to that, at least part of the process. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Len. And Adriana, did you have something you wanted to say before Dennis jumps in?
Sure. I just wanted to respond to Len's comment and say that Ethan and I have discussed that and agreed that if a project is delayed, that it would go into the first year that it's ready to be in, and second, that has funding. We don't want to kick projects out that are on time. So for example, if a project in 2027 needs to be programmed in 2028 instead, but 2028 already is full, then it would go to 2029, and we wouldn't kick out a 2028 project. At least that's what Ethan and I were discussing, but that's of course that nothing is decided, but yeah, we agree.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Dennis. Maybe could someone maybe invite Dennis to
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. I have two comments. One, the first one is really around the 25% threshold. I've been historically ambivalent about this, where I'd like to have, when I have my hot hat on, I say, yeah, we have to have 25%, that's the rule. And then I have my suburban hat and a small community hat on, and it says, well, not everyone has the ability to get to that 25% because of the design and the things that Adriana said during the presentation about not having any sort of firm commitment to dollars, and yet having to advance it and design dollars associated with that. I was wondering if there is a design threshold that we could have for some more complex problems or projects, and some less complex projects that could be below the 25%. Is there any, I guess I'll ask John, is there any relationship between a project that's really complex, forcing it to be 25%, and would it be okay to have projects that are less complex? Can you define a complex and a less complex project around for that purpose?
If I could, Jen, we generally, the whole thing about milestones, are 25, 75, 100%. When it's in between that, we don't have a clear read or indication that the project is going to meet that deadline. And to say something complex or not complex, we flag projects for risk with respect to design completion, with respect to right-of-way, and with respect to environmental. If the permitting is environmental permitting, if the environmental permitting is complex, then we may flag that as a higher risk. But it's not something that we generally share with the MPOs. It's part of our internal, is that we got to pay specific attention to certain things, or we need to get some permitting started earlier and start some consultation meetings to advance and try to get a read from the permitting agencies. Is this going to be acceptable, or what else they might be looking at? And then similarly with right-of-way, if we are impacting protected land, Article 97 protected land, parkland, DCR land, et cetera, then we also flag that's going to take a longer process to secure that approval through the legislature.
Yeah.
So we flag them as risk and we look at complexity there, but it's not something that I think outside entities would have access to and would get a lot of benefit from. I mean,
Yeah.
I could certainly share with the MPO if there was the question or through our Office of Planning, et cetera. But I don't know if that's something that would be readily available, Dennis.
Okay. Early on in the process, John, if I can follow up on the question,
Yep.
early on, before the project's even on the tip, and it's going through the review process, even maybe the scoring process, is there a way to define a project as being somewhat complex and a project that is less complex? Can you differentiate between the two early on in the process? That's my first question.
We do that as part of our. We have a different scoring system than the MPO, so I don't want to confuse those
Yep.
two things.
Okay.
The MPO scores, and I don't want to weigh in on that because I don't understand all the elements. Ethan and the team do a great job.
Yep.
Our scoring is to define whether it's funding eligible, and also identifies complexity in the project. As I stated, is the right of way or environmental permitting going to be complex? And we do score that, and we maintain that as part of our scoping.
Yeah.
So we do that in the very early stages.
Yeah.
But again, it's not something that we typically or readily share because it's usually we're assessing that project as it's being initiated. And then we want to get to a 25% design or a pre-25 and then a 25% design to assess, is that complexity accurate? And is it going to be a struggle to do this project? Or is, of all the planets aligned and we're going to be able to push this thing through a little bit more efficiently?
Great, that's very helpful. And refresh my memory, Ethan, in the MPO scoring, do we have a readiness scorecard? Or what we think is the ability for the project to be ready, and how much risk there is associated with that readiness?
Short answer to that is no. To add a little more detail to that, the reason why there is not currently an element of that in the actual scoring, that is obviously a part of the MPO's decision making, but the reason we are not scoring off that is that there is no LRTP vision or goal area that would fit under currently.
What do you mean by that? Could you clarify that?
The scoring criteria that staff use to evaluate projects are aligned to each of the goal areas that are laid out in the long range plan.
Okay. Yeah.
And there is no, for example, readiness or performance management goal area in the LRTP that would allow that to be incorporated in at this time.
Okay. But we could make that change if we do it through the long range plan, or we make an adjustment to that.
I might jump in and just because in my understanding, I guess there's like the readiness, and then there's like readiness is connected to the year it's programmed, right? And so like I think you'd almost need to have like a readiness assessment per year of TIP, if that makes sense. But also actually maybe like a follow-up on sort of Dennis, if I may, like if my understanding, at least historically, is we've assumed that anything that's programmed in that fifth year should be able to be delivered in the first year if it's already at 25 or percent. But also Adriana had some really great graphs and stuff that sort of spoke to this as well. So anyway, throwing that into the mix. But sorry, Dennis, do you want to? I didn't want to interrupt your line of questioning.
No, sorry, no, I'm okay with I'm off the 25% now. I got some clarification on that. That's good. Thank you for the information. The other comment I wanted to make, I wanted to follow up regarding the change of scope, and I think that is another element of a problem that we have is that the project changes in scope and sometimes significantly, right? And I would purport to think that the TIPA committee role should be to help look at those changes, right, and review those, and have the project proponent come in front of our committee when there is some sort of defined change of scope, whatever that may be, 10%, whatever that may be in scope change, that we review that scope to see, my sense is that, and John, correct me if I'm mistaken, but my sense is that change of scope is fairly easy when someone else is paying for it, right? When the MPO is going to pay for it, then they'll add that stuff to it, right? But we should probably have some sort of discussion around what the change is, and then who may want to pay for that. Is it the MPO that pays for it? Is the state that's going to pay for it if it's that significant change by MassDOT, or is it the municipality if there's a municipality involved? So it's not just a given that just because there's a change of scope that automatically the MPO is going to fund it. And I think that's an important discussion to have whenever there's a significant, whatever definition you want to use, a significant change of scope, that our committee reviews that and then makes a recommendation to the full board as a process. And that change in scope can be one time or it can be a cumulative over the project life, right? Because there's multiple changes of scope that would trigger a more deeper review.
Yes. John, did you want to take that, or Ethan? I know
Well, I wanted to add one thing. Dennis, excellent points, and I want to go back and commend Brad for his description articulating, change of scope. It's something that MassDOT, in all honesty, we struggle with as well, because it can come from an outside entity, through public outreach. It can come from a district regional office. It come from complete streets. It come from traffic, and not indicating that it's not a worthy change of scope, but that it needs to be flagged and assessed and not just unilaterally accepted. And I think that is the way that Brad was describing it on the MPO, is that, it could be a change in scope, not necessarily a bad thing, but it's a change. And then there's a risk factor. It could add right of way. It could add permitting. So and I say, we struggle with it a little bit, is just because there's so much impact in direction and requests from outside our agency or within our agencies, but in other offices, that sometimes it can spin a little bit and get momentum before we've fully assessed it, or it could spin and not get any momentum, and then someone gets wind of it and says, "Hey, why didn't we do that?" So we're struggling with the best way to elevate that, get it to the right department division to assess it, incorporate, or put it aside and say it's not something we're doing as part of this for whatever reason.
Thanks, John. That's helpful. Ethan, did you have something you wanted to add to this conversation?
Yeah, I actually kind of wanted to take a step back a fair bit. This is a very valuable discussion about the scope element. I did want to reiterate kind of the nature of this discussion, and that the reason why these guidelines are being brought forward is not to create a brand new policy, but to build on top of the existing 2021 project cost policy. To the comment that was made earlier, Dennis, and what you responded to, John, about level of detail about what is happening in between the different design milestones that are listed on screen here that we may not have best line of sight on. I absolutely agree that that is potentially something that once these guidelines are in place, we could try to move towards. I will, to be frank, say though that these guidelines, I think, are meant to avoid a situation that the board encountered this past year, where we had projects that were in year 1 and were only at 25%, or year 2 and didn't even have a 25% after several years already being on the tip. And I think in the spirit of sort of an iterative policy, we can try to get more towards the real specific drivers of what is causing the delays, what's getting missed and where, once we at least have some more clear, broader guardrails and milestones established. Because again, right now, the current policies as written are only looking at year 5 and ways to get on the tip. They are not looking at what we've already got on the tip.
Thanks, Ethan. Yeah, I think that's helpful. I did want to I think part of Dennis's points were about like the 25%, and as a kind of, is that a hard and fast kind of in or out sort of situation there. And I did want to just note that in this policy is written, or as the matrix is now, it does allow for PRC approved projects if there's like I think enough, a schedule and enough information to kind of justify that this, could realistically hit advertisement in that programmed year. And in my mind, that's partially to account for like maybe a small and clearly not very complex project that maybe Ethan or Gianna can speak if that's incorrect, but that was my assumption there, was to give a little bit of flexibility there, whereas like the median project, we probably would want a 25. Ethan.
Yeah, I'll note that is absolutely correct, and I had forgotten to address this just now as well. The point about getting more detail out of projects is also valuable because, also to be frank, I'm currently looking at a public information meeting set of slides that I attended last week, and there was a good slide that MassDOT provided in that meeting, which was showing the design process for typical projects, going through the MassDOT process, and how timelines can vary depending on the complexity for each stage. There are certain stages that may take a project 6 months. That same stage can take a different, more complex project 4 years, in some cases more. And so I think when we're talking about less complex projects and more complex projects, that is a very large gulf. And to earlier points, it is something that Adriana had showcased on the aggregate based on advertised projects. But we naturally will encounter, different extremes when we look at different kinds of projects in the tip. Intersection improvements that are targeted, or projects that may have very substantial environmental permits coming down the way, are naturally going to require a little bit more nuance than a universal policy can provide. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean that the policy isn't helpful, though, in some capacity.
Thanks, Ethan. I see Dennis lowered his hand, so I'm assuming that kind of satisfied that those questions for now. Move over to Len.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for being patient.
No problem. Hey, it's just the nature of discussion. It's fine, so I wait my turn. I'm fine with that. Sometimes it takes out my questions, but this time it didn't. So I actually engendered some more questions. This question goes to Ethan. When we're scoring, so if they're not 25% design, by the time we're scoring, what are we scoring? What are we using to score?
That's a very good question. So on this slide, in the top right corner under year 5 with the minimum, where it says or project review committee approved with a detail or schedule sufficient to illustrate a 25% design milestone. What staff have often found is that the municipalities that are submitting projects before the 25% stage, especially if they think they're going to get their 25% in within 6 months, have a pretty good idea, and I mean pretty good is a little bit of an understatement, but a very good idea as to what that project will look like, what alternatives they are not going to pursue, what is in the scope, what should be incorporated. Generally, the project has already at least gone through a scoping meeting with MassDOT and is moving forward. This goes back to, I think, a slide that Adriana had shown in a prior presentation, where that definition of what is 25% design can take 3 or 4 years. And sometimes the town will say, we are at 25, and what they give MPO staff to evaluate under is the same level of detail we would expect. But MassDOT does not have that 25 yet, and has not had the time to provide comments either. So there is inherently more risk with a 25 that MassDOT has not seen yet, but there is far less risk between a 25% that is still subject to approval and what I would say is a fully conceptual project.
Right. Well, is it unreasonable for me to, or just too ambitious to say that we should be scoring projects that are in the same stage? We are more fairly scoring all the projects, because if one is like, well, this is what we pretty much think is going to happen, and the other one's going, well, hey, we really thought this through. This is what we're going to do. We're not kind of scoring the same kind of entity, right?
I will say that the existing tip project cost policies do include a preliminary scoring opportunity for municipalities to pursue with their projects, regardless of design stage and if they want to pursue funding or not. So the criteria is still built to be able to be applied to even fairly low detail projects. In fact, we actually use the exact same criteria for the design projects, which are at a much lower level of detail than the construction ones, usually without much issue. To your point, though, about having a level playing field, I do think it goes back towards Dennis's earlier comment about differences in complexity. There are some projects that may still be working through alternatives analyses, and those alternatives may have substantial differences in cost, even past the 25% stage. I can think of at least one or two projects that are currently funded that are in that position. There are other projects, though, especially bridge projects, or certain kinds of bridge projects, where it might be more straightforward, or intersection projects that have ruled out a roundabout.
All right, I got you. Okay, well then that it make us really want to be in a position to maybe rescore if we get to year three and they or year two and they are coming up to the 75% stage being and things have changed a lot, then we could let's rescore and or determine if they move forward or backwards based on the changes in cost because what I'm going to say is that given that we have an example of a process for a successful project, I would say let's be pretty rigid about these. It's like if a project we don't want to get to year two and not have a project at 75% design. If it's not, then it's like, okay, you're not moving forward, and if other projects are advancing, and requiring the money, you may even move back. And I would say let's start off, being a bit hardcore and rigid, so that we are treating everyone the same way, and then figure out the way we need to do exceptions. And maybe something that can help us, with this, is to do some kind of role play in this, where we come up design projects and then create various situations for ourselves, and then say, how do you deal with that tipper committee, and kind of test it out that way. That's it. Thank you.
Like this role-playing exercise idea. Okay. Get ready for tip season practice round with made up projects that yeah. Okay.
AI generated.
Yeah. Yeah, no thanks Len, for those points. There was something I did want to clarify from what you had said, but now I lost the train of thought, so I'm not going to do that. I will return to it if it comes back. Any other kind of thoughts, questions about kind of these, kind of how staff have laid out these minimum requirements? Again, I think that there will be a conversation probably at our next meeting about sort of the what happens if a project doesn't hit these requirements, and kind of the mechanisms we want to employ there. But I guess, yeah, conversation today mostly around the these kind of guidelines themselves. Yeah, and I think we've seen these at the previous meeting. We also had Adriana kind of present on sort of some of the data that staff used to develop these, based on kind of the trajectory of a variety of different projects over the past several years. Okay, I'm gonna wait a few more seconds, and then before kind of move on to the next item. So staff, I guess maybe a question for staff is, well, I think I'm assuming at the next meeting there may be another opportunity to see this and provide feedback on it. I guess would it be helpful for you today if I kind of said, got a straw poll, I guess, of like who's maybe if anyone does anyone at this moment kind of have maybe I'd like to see who needs more time to like look over these, who has maybe are there any concerns right now remaining? I'm assuming not a ton of concerns remaining because I'm not hearing any other questions. So maybe the question really is like, do we think at next meeting we might be at a place where we could kind of get a sense of the body on this? But Ethan. Tell me if that's a bad idea.
I don't think that's a bad idea. I will say though, that we are looking to have the board also review this policy, and that will likely be, ideally, we would like that to be in place before tip readiness days in February. We're currently targeting December so that we can use this as part of the quarterly readiness days frame. So there are, or end of December. So there are a fair few months left for this specific item to be worked out. The rescoring policy is coming sooner, but we do want to provide plenty of time for members of this committee to think this over. And again, when I refer to this, I am just referring to the 5-year readiness guidelines. Any discussion of consequences or outcomes, that matrix that was shown earlier, that would also be a separate item, I think, at this stage. So, you know, if folks want to vote or just do a straw poll, they are welcome to do so. I would note there's ample time to kind of continue working this through. We're still just trying to make sure and suss out where folks think there could be improvements. And before I see the floor to Brad, I will note the scope item is something staff will look into a little bit more as part of that.
Thank you, Ethan. And Brad.
Thanks, Chair. I think that, as you noted, the board and the Tipper committee have discussed a version of this nuance of steps within steps of project development. But a question that I'm still struggling with after all these months and years is, what information actually is provided from who to whom when? And what I mean by that is MPO staff have often brought to us at Tipper and to the full board, hey, we've got new information from a project proponent. Hey, we've got new information from Mass DOT. I would find it valuable in this meeting to actually understand with a little bit more specificity, is that information flow automated? Is it provided in a written form in like a big picture spreadsheet of all projects in a universe with flags and highlights or red text, kind of like our tip tables? Or is it phone calls, heads up, courtesy, one-off emails? I'm a little bit worried about the onus being placed on project proponents to fill in the gaps here and putting staff in an unfair position because they don't have all the intel. I'm also a little bit worried about unfair expectations on Mass DOT staff to be providing like full universes of projects. So I don't have a recommendation, but I just want to understand a little bit more about the information flow here. So maybe that's a question more for Ethan and Adriana than it is for the DOT team at first.
Yeah, I can speak to this, and then I know the DOT team also has some actual processes and systems they have that they enforce for their own tracking. But on the MPO staff side, the best level of detail and information we get is usually for the quarter 2 readiness update, which is the tip readiness days exercise in February. For the other 3 quarterly updates, the goal there had been to get more of like a spreadsheet form for projects to allow us to better monitor project updates at other points in the year. And we are still trying to work towards that. I do think one of the limitations we've encountered over this past year is that those meetings have actually been a little bit more about near-term crises impacting the tip than longer-term programmatic conditions. When I'm saying crises, to be clear, I'm referring to projects with readiness issues that are coming before the board within the month for a tip amendment, not longer-term, hey, this project's 4 years out. So I just want to draw that distinction there. So again, to answer your question, Brad, most of the time we are getting our information as MPO staff through the latter channel, which is usually more of a gopher exercise of just trying to identify specific information project by project. And I will concede that that has been somewhat ineffective just due to the breadth of projects that staff are funded in the tip relative to staff's capacity to do so. Though I will also give credit where it's due that MassDOT Highway Division and the program management team have been helping us get better at this and also identify issues far sooner than we were otherwise able to. And I don't know if John or Ben and Michael want to weigh in on that as well.
I don't have anything to weigh in on that, Ethan. I think we're trying to, if we have if we have I don't want to call it an issue, but if we have something we need input from the proponent and we're having difficulty getting that, we do try to work with the MPO and this isn't just Boston. I mean, obviously, I worry statewide, but we do come to the MPO or go to individual MPOs and just say, hey, we're trying to get in touch with the right people, and they're just not getting back to us. And can you help us a little bit in because they're going to come to the MPO saying, hey, we were on this schedule and now we get moved because, and sometimes it's because we haven't got an update in a while. So we're trying to be more reaching out to through our planning office to our MPOs to stay engaged. And if we flag something, it's not my goal. I don't want projects competing. I don't want state projects competing with local target projects or anything like that. But I have something in our program. I want to deliver it to the schedule that's in our program. And if I can get a little bit of help from the MPO, whatever region, then that's the way we go. And I rely on my program team as well as OTP to help facilitate that. So, Michael or Ben, I don't know if you had something else you wanted to share.
Yeah, thanks, John, and thanks all for the acknowledgement that all of us have limited staff time and we're all pulled in 100 directions. I think to that exact point, Ben joining our team in headquarters, coming back to a role here in Park Plaza, has very much been about trying to scale up these channels of communication, not just for Boston MPO, but for all of our regional partners and regional staff. So it's funny, as you were asking, is there some master spreadsheet somewhere? We're looking at one that we've developed for our own readiness preparations. And I think the hesitancy has always been just sort of like our raw project data is just that, it's raw. So I think we need to kind of consider how we would be sharing this kind of product. But certainly we're poised to improve this communication so that it isn't just gophering, as you put it, Ethan, and does give you more of a programmatic 5-year view of how things are shaping up and what our schedules are saying and how to line up with this requirements guidance that you're showing on screen.
Thank you. That's super helpful to hear. And one of the takeaways from this meeting is going to be gophering as a verb. I like it. But so I guess actually, so on that, maybe I'll just return to Brad real quick. Does that sort of answer your question sufficiently? Because I think maybe what I've shifted to doing is I want to have a list at the end of this time, which is probably getting maybe we have a 5-10 more minutes or so before we should shift to the other agenda item. But I'd like to kind of have a list of like, okay, here are the things that this body would like Ethan and Adriana to come back with next week. Or sorry, not next week. Next meeting, which with to like further elucidate anything that would make us all kind of feel better about making some sort of recommendation around this. And so far I definitely have like the scope as one that's flagged. It seemed like the size of the project might have gotten resolved, although I'd like to return to Dennis to quickly see if that's actually the case. And then Brad, yeah, I think this question about information flow, I want to see, does that feel resolved?
Well, thanks, Chair. I definitely feel more educated, and I think it's important to kind of frame my question through a lens of gratitude. Thank you, John. Thank you, Michael and team, for continuing to educate us. And I think it's important to frame my question and my processing through the lens of we are not going to come up with our forever solution right now, this cycle. I think we've been really clear on this committee that we're playing the long game and that we recognize that incremental process improvements, incremental improvements in information flow and risk mitigation is what we're after. So yeah, if there is a 1 and a 2 and a 3-year process ahead of us of building the information technology tools that allow for greater agency, proponent, staff, and public information about all these important projects, I'm under no illusions that we're going to have our forever solution with this particular cycle or the vote that staff is seeking from our board at the end of December. Thanks.
Thanks, Brad. That's helpful. And yeah, definitely a good context of this isn't our last opportunity to tweak this. And I'll modify what I said earlier in that I don't want to it would be great if there's any other issues that folks want to surface now, but also maybe in the next couple weeks, if there are additional thoughts of things or like conversations that need to happen, definitely write to Adriana, Ethan, and I, and we can make sure that that material related to that is brought to the next time we get together. So yeah, is there anything anyone wants to bring up now before we shift to the next agenda item? Right. Hearing none, I think we'll move over to, I think this is going to be a quicker kind of maybe recap debrief of where we are with project scoring, rescoring. And I believe Ethan is taking this one.
Yes, thank you. So this is mostly a summary presentation. I just wanted to kind of, if we go on to the next slide, reiterate a few things about how discussions going forward about this topic relate to what was presented to the MPO this morning. If we can go on to the next slide, please. So just to reiterate, so after this morning's discussion, staff are now initiating the solicitation of new project information for those 13 projects we discussed this morning. Again, to help improve decision-making for the federal fiscal years 2027 to 31 tip. That email, we're hoping to have it go out tomorrow with the application links live and ready to go. That email will not only include the project proponents, it will also include the MassDOT project managers and folks from MassDOT Highway Headquarters. We are also going to be BCCing the sub-regional representatives for the MPO sub-regional seats, as coincidentally, all sub-regional seats are represent projects that are included in that list, which if that makes sense. So you can expect that email tomorrow. And in October, staff are going to return to the MPO board with what we're hoping is a written draft policy that is aiming to codify this process, which is going to be in tandem with LRTP updates. So to the comment Brad just made on the other topic, this is very much a process that we hope is iterative and can be adapted over time to frankly be a little bit less disruptive going forward. If we go on to the next slide, I'll describe what I mean. So functionally, what was presented to the board this morning is about rescoring the oldest projects that are currently on the 2027 to 31 tip. There is a very substantial gulf between those 13 projects, the ones that haven't been scored and the ones that were scored 5 or more years ago, and the ones that are going to be applying this fall, or the ones that were applied last year and were not funded. What will happen, we hope, after this project rescoring that we're referring to right now as stage 1, is that if we were to repeat this process in a future tip, that this would actually be easier because the projects that we would be rescoring would have a little bit more up to date. We would be looking at projects that are about 3 or 4 years old instead of 5 to 8 years old as far as their overall scoring. So again, we would imagine it would be less disruptive. And the purpose of establishing a full policy is to enable that and make this more predictable. The more that this gets repeated, the less likelihood there is that MPO staff are going to have such a broad gulf of information that decision-making at the board is not fully equipped by scoring information for these projects, if that makes sense. And this next slide helps to illustrate that a little bit better. The objective of the actual scoring policy, again, likely going to the MPO board in October, we think, is that the rescoring policy will help to set new baselines with the same cadence of each long-range plan update, such that when there is a new long-range plan, especially in circumstances where the long-range plan, as with the last one, may add or change the vision and goal areas for projects. As a refresher, the current LRTP includes a resilience goal category that was not there previously, and also no longer includes a system preservation and modernization category. When things of that nature start happening, we can then begin updating projects accordingly as well. Again, the gulfs will be smaller in the future. But by establishing this as a policy, we can also make it predictable so project proponents know what they're getting. For lack of a better term, know what they are getting into when they apply to the tip and are funded through the tip, and know when they can expect to be reevaluated. Worth noting that if this policy is put in place, it would not actually entail any further rescoring after this year until the 2029 to 2033 tip development. So 3 tip cycles from now. If we go on to the next slide, The point of this basically is just to open the floor of discussion, is that staff are now going to be initiating the project rescoring. That information, we hope the results of that rescoring will come back to the full MPO board, ideally in early March when we're developing the 2027 to 31 tip. So for now, we want to focus more on what the actual policy should look like, what should be entailed within it, when that does go to the board in October. How should it be written? Should the cadence of lining up with LRTP cycles be sufficient? But also to give a little bit of space just to debrief on the discussion this morning, discuss anything there further, and just any general policies and priorities around how projects should be evaluated going forward. So we're leaving this fairly open-ended and just more trying to reiterate that, again, this is an ongoing process that we're going to keep trying to update and tweak as we get early information in.
Thanks, Ethan. Does anyone have questions or thoughts around that? I know we've spoken about this topic a bit today. Okay. Hearing. Yeah, Ethan.
I will actually add another question to this because this may be helpful. Staff have not yet identified the and I apologize, I think we're getting something blocking the slides. Thanks, Adrian. There we go. Staff have not yet identified the meeting date for the next meeting of the TIP committee. Though I did mention before that we were looking to bring a draft policy, which would entail a policy memo to the TIP committee, or I should say to the full MPO board in October. I believe because there is no formal agenda set for those October meetings, that is a little bit flexible, though recognize that there is an MPO annual meeting in November that it would not be brought to. The point of all of me mentioning this is basically to say, would it be valuable to this committee if staff developed a very draft policy, brought it to this committee, provided members with a week to review it? We discussed it at a committee meeting before it went to the full MPO board. And is that the best way that this information should be packaged? That is not currently the plan based on the schedule we have set, but if members would prefer that, we can at least try to accommodate that, recognizing some of the discussion that happened this morning.
Quick follow-up question, Ethan, on that is would you anticipate that the draft policy would be very similar to what we've basically talked about and moved forward with this year with the 13 projects, that like if it's any project that is no longer using the same scoring criteria should be rescored, kind of, I don't know. I was just curious, like, how much difference would there be, or is it mostly something we've seen just like broadly applied?
Yes, so if we can actually go back one slide just to kind of show visually what I'll be talking about. I believe staff may be approaching this from the perspective that this is a revision or addendum to the 2021 cost policies for one. As a result, what the written policy will likely cover would be reiterating what those policies that are already in place say are triggers for rescoring, but then to also add conditions under which when there is a new update to the long range plan, projects that have been on the tip for a specific amount of time or greater, or have not been scored through the tip, would be subject to scoring under the new criteria established through that long range planning process. I believe that is generally what the policy would look like. I do not have, I believe, again, frankly, that the TIP team here has only ever written one, since I've been here, has written one memo in the past, and that was for the Transit Transformation Program. I know that many memos that the full board reviews are fairly substantial. I think this would actually be fairly succinct, contrary to my answer to your question. So I hope that helps, though, just to say, like, I think we would keep it fairly brief, and I think it would mostly line up with functionally what's on the slide here and just be something that establishes a cadence beyond even this next LRTP.
Anyone have thoughts about kind of wanting to take a look at that prior to it being brought to the full board? And are we still potentially targeting the September 25th as our next meeting date? Because I guess back a week from that would mean staff would have to share the memo on the 18th.
Given that the 18th is during the AMPO annual meeting,
Right,
that would
yeah.
likely be fairly difficult.
Yeah.
I believe we have been looking at the 25th as a fallback date for this meeting had it not been able to happen.
Oh, that's it. Okay, got it.
With that said, I know that there is not currently an October meeting scheduled, so that could be potentially accommodated. Staff will obviously work with you and with this committee to identify that.
Okay. All right, not hearing. Oh, Brad.
Jen, the totality of this conversation makes me think that staff really heard some of the comments raised by some board members earlier this morning at the full board, which were understandable concerns about a potential punitive application of a rescoring process. And I think that staff worked in that meeting to try to assure folks, look, this is about level playing fields. This is not about giving projects the boot. So I think it's just important to reiterate that we're trying to do no harm here. However, we do have legacy projects that were never scored. We do have fill-in projects that were never scored. And we do have a dynamic LRTP framework that has the potential to change scoring criteria, as you note here, Ethan. So yeah, I just think it's going to be important to continue to say words like those throughout this process so that folks' deepest concerns about losing the places that they've fought for, particularly in smaller communities that are resource constrained or are not nimble because they have to go to town meeting all the time to get an extra design budget to go from 25% to 75%. Like those are some of the crucial regional partners, board members, and end users that we need to assure throughout this process.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess actually maybe to clarify better, you're suggesting that you think that the sense is that staff might not need to take the extra step of bringing this to us first, or that maybe it would be good just to kind of have that extra level of assurance, or like have us all on board that that's what's happening here.
No, Jen, I think my point is more just about the care of our choices of language and the reassurances that we provide to proponents and to board members and to agency partners.
Okay.
About the intents here and about any use cases that could end up in projects being penalized in the minds of proponents who have a million reasons to be stressed out about project viability these days.
Okay, that makes sense. So not weighing in one way or the other on the question of bringing it here first. Well, maybe I'll leave that open since no one seems to be expressing a strong feeling one way or the other to staff and their discretion, whether they want to bring it to us first and would find value of that, or if it seems like this is something they can just bring straight to the board. All right. Anything further on scoring, rescoring before we move to members' items? All right, seeing none. Members' items. Does anyone have a report or notice that they would like to bring to the group? Chris.
Hi. Thanks, Jen. Hope everyone can hear me. Having some bandwidth issues, but I just wanted to let the group know that I'm leaving my position in the MPO activities team at MassDOT. At the end of the month, I'll be joining the community grants group in the highway division. So Derek Schuster, who I believe is on the call, still with us, unless he had to hop to another meeting, will be filling in for my role. As this might be my last, just want to thank everyone for the opportunity to participate here. Really important work that this group does, and a couple items you've carried with grace over the last 4 to 6 months and carrying in from last development season. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks for letting us know, Chris, and thank you for your time joining us and serving. And it's been great having you, and looking forward to seeing what you do in the other team. Their reports and notices. All right. In that case, is there a motion to adjourn the meeting? A little bit early this time. Brad,
I'll move to adjourn. Thank you.
is there a second?
I'll second that.
All right. And my notes are saying I have to say all in favor. So I guess everyone can be in favor. Great. Well, thanks everyone. Good seeing you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jen.